My name is Pearl Graham. I'm 31, and up until a few months ago, I would have sworn my marriage was solid. Not perfect, not magical, not movie-worthy, just solid. The kind of steady, predictable life people point to and say, they've got it figured out. I work in finance. Nothing glamorous. Spreadsheets, risk reports, and more coffee than should be legal. I'm the type who likes things clear. Straightforward. Numbers add up or they don't. People keep their word or they don't. Loyalty matters. Respect matters. And I don't do games. My husband, well, ex-husband now, is Mason, 29. Creative type. Graphic design, color palettes, late-night client edits. I used to love how different we were, my structure, his flow. For a long time it worked beautifully. We met at a mutual friend's wedding. One of those events where everyone pretends they aren't stressed, even though the air practically vibrates with tension. I was a bridesmaid. Mason was a groomsman. During the reception, the DJ blasted music loud enough to cause permanent hearing loss. I stood on the edge of the dance floor watching half-hearted dancers flail in all directions. That's when I saw him, doing the kind of dance moves that looked like a parody of dancing. Exaggerated shoulders, tragic footwork, but fully committed to being ridiculous. I laughed. He caught me laughing. So he doubled down, doing something even worse. I stepped onto the floor and matched his terrible move with one even more catastrophic. He burst out laughing, real and loud, and just like that, the rest of the room blurred. We talked between songs, joked like we'd known each other for years, skipped the awkward small talk entirely. We exchanged numbers before the night ended. Coffee the next week turned into dinner. Dinner turned into weekends walking the city, pretending we knew it better than we did. Our dating stage was simple, steady. No games, no silent treatments, no dramatic tests disguised as growth. Just two adults learning each other's rhythms. He showed me design mock-ups. I told him stories from work. We tried new restaurants, watched awful movies, built routines without ever planning to. A year in, I knew I wanted to marry him. I'm not the over-the-top proposal type, so I planned something that felt like us. Quiet, intimate, real. We took a weekend trip to the mountains. On the second day, we hiked to a lookout where the entire valley spread out like someone painted it. My hands shook like I'd overdosed on caffeine. I barely got half a sentence out before he said yes. He cried. I laughed. Then he laughed through tears and squeezed me like he was afraid I'd float away. We got married 6 months later. Small ceremony, close family, a few friends. I remember looking at him at the altar thinking, this is it. This is the person I build life with. The first 5 years of our marriage were the kind people fantasize about. We bought a townhouse in a quiet neighborhood, talked about kids someday, shared chores, shared bills, shared grocery lists, left on sticky notes around the kitchen. Nothing dramatic, nothing toxic, just life. Mason worked from home a few days a week. I usually got home by 5. Some nights we cooked full dinners. Some nights we burned things and ordered takeout while laughing at ourselves. We had our shows, our routines, our little rituals. And I really believed I was a good wife. Not perfect, but steady, loyal, communicative, grounded. I showed up. I didn't belittle him. I didn't play mind games. And I didn't chase people who stepped away. Once respect starts slipping, I don't cling. That's who I am. Mason was soft in a good way, warm. He remembered birthdays, made playlists for long drives, always picked up on small details. But he also had a trait I once thought was harmless. He absorbed whatever the strongest voice around him was saying. He could be influenced easily, not manipulated exactly, but guided, tilted, nudged. At first, it never mattered. His circle was small. People with gentle lives, healthy relationships, stable expectations. Then came the night everything shifted. His brother Owen turned 30, and the family threw a laid-back backyard gathering. String lights, plastic tables, kids weaving between chairs, older relatives yelling jokes across the lawn. We brought a store-bought pie because we forgot to bake something real. Owen's wife practically praised us like we'd delivered gourmet catering. While Mason drifted off to talk to cousins, I set the pie near the patio. That's when I noticed the triangle forming across the yard. Mason stood with 2 guys I'd never met. One walked with the kind of confidence that said he assumed everyone admired him before he even opened his mouth. The other hovered behind him, nodding gently, like his emotions depended on someone else's approval. Mason waved me over. "Pearl, come meet the guys," he said. I approached, wiping my hands on my jeans. "This is Brandon," Mason said, gesturing to the confident one. "And this is Paul. We've been hitting the gym together." Brandon looked me up and down like he was inspecting merchandise. Paul smiled weakly, the way people do when they're apologizing for a friend's personality without actually saying it. "So this is Pearl," Brandon said, tone dripping with judgment. "Mason's anchor." "Good things, I hope," I said lightly. He ignored that. Instead, he launched into a monologue about how most wives secretly want to control their husbands, how men lose themselves in marriage, how modern relationships are tests, not partnerships. Paul nodded like his life depended on it. Mason listened with a focused intensity I had not seen before. Then Brandon turned to me. "So, Pearl, are you one of those wives who expects your husband to worship you because you cooked twice this week?" I raised an eyebrow. "I cook more than Mason," I said. "He burns toast." Paul snorted into his drink. Mason nudged me, smiling. Brandon kept going, clearly annoyed his jab didn't land. "Must be nice doing bare minimum and calling it partnership." I tilted my head. "Must be nice thinking 2 divorces makes you a relationship expert." His face froze. "Excuse me? You asked a question," I said. I answered. A couple of relatives nearby slowed down, sensing entertainment. "You're seriously disrespectful," Brandon snapped. "I'm responding to what you say," I replied. "If you don't like the echo, stop shouting into the canyon." Even Paul suppressed a laugh. Mason looked between us, amused, but also impressed, admiring Brandon's intensity more than he should have. Brandon turned to Mason. "Control your wife, man." "There it is," I said quietly. The guy who never shuts up about independence asking someone else to fix his problems. He sputtered, but someone called Owen over to blow out candles, and the moment dissolved. But all evening I noticed it. Brandon talking loudly, performing masculinity like a show, Paul nodding like a shadow, Mason absorbing every word. On the drive home, Mason said, "Brandon's intense." "That's one word," I replied. "He's been through a lot," Mason said. 2 divorces. Says it opened his eyes. I watched the passing streetlights flicker across his face. "Just be careful," I said. "With what?" "With confusing loudness for wisdom." He laughed, thinking I was teasing. But something inside me whispered otherwise, something small and sharp, like a crack forming in glass, thin, barely visible, but dangerous. I didn't know it yet, but that night was the beginning. The triangle had formed, and soon it would wedge itself deep into my marriage. If I had to pinpoint when things shifted from, "maybe I'm overthinking this," to, "no, something is really wrong," it was in the months after Owen's birthday. The triangle locked in fast. Brandon, Paul, Mason. Guys' nights started once a week, then twice. Group chats pinged on Mason's phone at midnight. New inside jokes, new phrases, new philosophies about relationships that did not exist in our marriage before Brandon arrived. At first, I didn't make a big deal of it. I'm not the "you can't see your friends" type. I liked that Mason had people to lift weights with and rant about sports with. But slowly, the tone at home changed. It started small. One evening, I asked, "Hey, do you want to watch the next episode of our show?" Mason didn't look up from his phone. "I'm not just here to entertain you, Pearl." No context, no lead-in, just a random accusation dropped in the middle of a Tuesday. I blinked. "I never said you were." He sighed like I'd proven a point for him. "You wouldn't get it. You're comfortable. You don't see the ways you expect things." That didn't sound like my husband. That sounded like a quote. The next morning over coffee, he told me, "You know, most women don't realize men carry the emotional burden too. We just don't complain." I stared at him over my mug. "Who are you quoting right now?" His head snapped up. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said slowly, "you don't talk like that. That's not your voice. That's Brandon's." He crossed his arms like I'd insulted his existence. "So now I'm not allowed to have my own thoughts?" "Sure," I said evenly, "when they're actually yours." He shoved back his chair and left the kitchen like he was in a teen drama audition. The door slam echoed longer than it should have. After that, the test began. Out of nowhere, he'd say, "Let me see your phone." No reason, no lead up, just demand. The first time I handed it over, no hesitation. I had nothing to hide. He scrolled like he expected to find a secret boyfriend hiding between banking apps. He handed it back with a disappointed look, like he'd studied for a test and never got the exam. The second time I said no. His eyes widened. "Why not? What are you hiding?" "Boundaries," I said. "Try them sometime." He acted like I'd slapped him. Wow, You're really showing your true colors, Pearl. Great, I said. Make sure you tell Brandon I failed the audit. He stormed off, muttering something about me being emotionally unavailable. Another line I recognized. Brandon again. My husband used to talk like a human. Now he sounded like a stitched-together podcast episode. Then came the loaded hypotheticals. If I quit my job, would you support me financially the whole time? If I just disappeared for a week to clear my head, would you still trust me? If I completely changed everything about myself, would you still love me? Every answer I gave was apparently wrong. If I told him the truth, that quitting his job without a plan would stress both of us, he'd say I was unsupportive. If I said I'd still love him even if things got hard, he'd accuse me of only saying what I thought I should say. It wasn't about the questions. It was about the scoring system running silently in his head. Then he tried a public test. We were at a home decor store because he suddenly needed a new vibe for the living room, whatever that meant. We were walking down an aisle when he glanced at one of the employees and said, just a little too loudly, "He's pretty good looking, right?" I didn't even bother looking up. "If you say so." He waited. "You didn't even look," he said. "I'm busy trying to figure out why we need a third throw blanket," I replied. "Focus." He tried again, a little louder. "I said he's good looking, Pearl. Doesn't that bother you?" I sighed. He's a stranger trying to stock a shelf without getting yelled at. I'm not going to compete with aisle 6. A couple near us stifled a laugh. Mason flushed, like I'd failed a test I didn't sign up for. At home, everything turned into a performance review. If I didn't react big enough, I was cold. If I reacted honestly, I was controlling. If I set boundaries, I was afraid of losing power. None of those words were mine. None of them sounded like the man I married. They sounded like they'd been downloaded from Brandon's brain and installed directly into Mason's mouth. One night, after a tense dinner where he accused me of not believing in his potential because I questioned him quitting a steady client, I took a deep breath and said, "We need to talk to someone, a counselor, a real one, a neutral third party." His reaction was immediate. "Counseling doesn't fix anything. Men only agree to counseling when they want to manipulate the narrative." That was verbatim Brandon. I knew it because I'd overheard Brandon laughing about therapists siding with wives. I set my fork down. "So, you'd rather listen to a twice-divorced guy at a bar than someone actually trained to help?" His jaw clenched. "You just don't get it. You never have." I stared at him across the table. "Then explain it. I'm right here." But he wouldn't. Every time I tried to move past slogans into something real, he dodged with another recycled quote about growth and independence and needing to test the foundation. Then came the night he stood in the living room doorway, hands clasped like he was giving a presentation. "I need space, Pearl," he said. "I don't know who I am anymore." "Okay," I said, calm. "What does that mean specifically?" "I just told you," he snapped. "I feel like I'm not myself." "That's a sentence, Mason," I said softly. "Not an explanation." "You wouldn't understand," he said. "Women usually don't." Brandon again, word for word. I swallowed. "So help me, use your own words." Instead, he delivered a speech about personal evolution and being held back and needing to break patterns. It sounded less like a confession and more like a script he'd memorized. By the time he finished, my head hurt. "So what are you actually saying?" I asked. "What do you want?" He pulled in a breath, eyes flicking away from mine. "I found a place already. I can move in 2 weeks." Silence. "You already found a place," I repeated. "Yeah, Paul's friend has a spare room. It'll give me time to figure things out." "This isn't a conversation," I said. "It's a briefing." He flinched, but didn't deny it. When move-out day came, he was quiet, efficient. He took roughly half the furniture, most of his clothes, and most of the decor he'd decided expressed his evolving identity. He paused near the door with the last box in his arms. "This doesn't have to be permanent," he said. "We'll figure it out." I looked at him, at the near-empty living room behind him, the patch of wall where our wedding photos used to hang. "Then stop turning our marriage into an experiment," I said. He didn't answer that. He just walked out, loaded the box into Paul's car, and drove off like he was heading to a 3-month artist residency instead of leaving his wife. The silence after he left was louder than the door closing. For a while, I just stood in the middle of our hollow living room, surrounded by rectangles of cleaner paint where frames used to be. The refrigerator hummed like it was the only living thing left in the house. My phone buzzed with messages from friends checking in. "How are you holding up?" "Heard things are rough. We're here if you need anything." The tone was too careful, like they already had a script of their own. I walked through each room, taking in what he'd left behind. An empty drawer, half a bookshelf, the dent on the couch cushion where he always sat. I lay down that night in a bed that felt 3 times bigger and stared at the ceiling, counting how many times I'd chosen him over my own comfort. Over work invitations, over solo trips, over quiet weekends I'd wanted to myself. And somewhere between the second and third hour of not sleeping, a thought settled in. This wasn't just a rough patch. This was him stepping onto a stage Brandon built and asking me to sit in the audience and clap. I decided something right then. I would not beg him to come home. I would not chase him through whatever growth arc he thought he was living. And if he turned our marriage into a test, I wasn't going to cheat to pass it. A week after he moved out, the weirdness escalated. He started accidentally bumping into me around town. Once at the grocery store I'd been going to for 5 years. Once in my gym parking lot, even though his gym was across town. Once at a coffee shop I only visit when I'm too tired to make my own espresso. "Oh, hey," he said each time, acting surprised. "Didn't know you come here." "Mason," I said outside the coffee shop, "you live on the other side of the city now." He shrugged. "I'm allowed to go places, Pearl." That night, I checked my phone settings. We still had location sharing on from years ago, when we used it for practical things, meeting up after work, finding each other at crowded events. He'd never turned his off. I turned mine off. Curious what would happen when the coincidences had to work harder. Days stretched. Texts from him became shorter, colder. Just notes about bills, mail, logistics. My days were full and flat at the same time, like someone turned the contrast down on my entire life. Then, nearly a month after he moved out, my phone lit up with a message from him that said, "Can we meet? I want to talk." Just like that. No apology, no explanation. I stared at the screen for a minute, then typed back, "Sure, when?" He sent a location, a quiet cafe with soft lighting and overpriced pastries. The kind of place couples went to talk about big decisions, or end them. I went, not hopeful, not devastated, just steady, braced. I thought maybe, finally, he'd stop performing and talk to me like the man I married. I should have known better when I saw the folder in his hand. When I sat down across from Mason in that quiet cafe, I noticed 2 things immediately. His hands were shaking just slightly, and the folder on the table was positioned perfectly between us, like a prop waiting for its cue. He didn't even bother easing into it. No small talk, no warm-up. He slid the folder toward me. "Divorce papers." Just like that. No build-up, no context, no conversation about counseling or repair or even frustration. Just paperwork, like he was handing me a contract I'd been expecting. My fingers rested on the edge of the folder, but I didn't open it. I looked at him instead. "You're sure about this?" I asked softly. "Yes," he said too quickly. "It's what I need. I have to prioritize my personal growth, Pearl. I can't do that while being held back." "Held back how?" I asked. He blinked. Once, twice. His gaze wavered, like he hadn't rehearsed this part. "You just don't support my evolution," he said, stringing together a pile of buzzwords. "You're not listening to what I need." "I am," I said calmly. "You're the one who isn't telling me anything real." He straightened, irritation creeping into his posture. I could feel it, the frustration of a man whose script wasn't landing the way the director promised. "You should know what's wrong," he said. "If you cared, you'd fight for me." There it was. The test. The prove your love trap. He wanted tears. He wanted a scene. He wanted me to beg him not to leave so he could run back to Brandon and say, "See, she fought. She passed." I opened the folder. The pages were drafts, petitions, acknowledgments, initial spaces. Nothing filed yet. Nothing official. Just bait. I picked up a pen from the table. "Pearl, what are you doing?" he asked, suddenly wide-eyed. "Reading," I said. "You handed me paperwork. I'm treating it like paperwork." "You're supposed to show me you care," he snapped. "If you love me, you don't just initial a form." I met his eyes. "If you loved me, you wouldn't use divorce as a test." He opened his mouth, closed it. His rehearsed lines were unraveling. I initialed the acknowledgement of receipt, the only document that should be signed in a cafe, and left the rest untouched. I slid the folder back to him. "Have your attorney send everything through mine," I said. "If you want out, you're out." He looked like I'd struck him. His whole face fell apart, not in grief, but in shock. This wasn't how Brandon told him the test would go. "Wait," he stammered. "Maybe we should talk first." "I tried talking," I said. "You wanted a performance." "That's not true." "It is," I replied. "You wanted drama instead of honesty. I don't do drama." His eyes were glossy now, but tears don't undo choices. "You're being cold," he whispered. "No," I said softly. "I'm being done." I stood, pushed in my chair, and walked out. He didn't follow. He just sat there gripping the folder like it was a grenade he'd accidentally armed. By the time I got home, my phone was already buzzing. Friends, mutual acquaintances. But the tone was strange, cautious, rehearsed. You okay? Stay strong. If you ever need to talk, I'm here. And then the one that gave everything away. I didn't know you were so controlling. Nobody told me it was that bad. I stared at the screen. Controlling? Brandon had been busy. I replied with calm, simple clarity. No ranting, no defensiveness. Mason presented divorce papers. I respected his choice. That's all there is to it. People can believe whatever they want. I wasn't going to rebuild my reputation around someone else's lies. The next morning, I hired a lawyer. We talked assets, accounts, timelines. He filed my appearance. I signed nothing until he reviewed every word. No drama, no mess, just adulthood. That night, Mason finally called. His voice was shaking. Pearl, he said quietly, I made a mistake. I said nothing. I wasn't actually going to go through with it, he rushed on. It was supposed to be a test. There it was, the truth, stripped of pretense. Brandon said that if you really cared, you'd refuse to sign, he whispered. He said men who love their wives fight. And if you didn't fight, I'd know you didn't love me enough. I closed my eyes. He had gambled our marriage on someone else's fantasy. He kept talking, sobbing now, about how Brandon convinced him this was normal, how tests strengthen relationships, how I'd wake up emotionally if he pushed me far enough. The sad part? He believed every word at the time. When he finally ran out of breath, I simply said, "Good night, Mason," and hung up. The next morning, he sent me a text the length of a novel. He confessed everything. Brandon pressured him. Brandon wrote the steps. Brandon told him how to detach, how to accuse, how to move out, how to escalate. It was all a formula. Famal. I read it twice. Then I replied, "You let someone else sabotage our marriage. I'm not playing these games anymore." He called 3 times. I didn't answer. An hour later, my phone buzzed again. But this time it wasn't Mason. It was Paul, the quiet one, the follower. His message was short. "Pearl, please. I really need to talk to you. I know I don't deserve the chance, but I have to tell you the truth." I met Paul at a small cafe downtown. He looked rough, pale, exhausted, like guilt had been chewing on him for weeks. "Thank you for coming," he said instantly. "Say what you need to say," I replied. He took a deep, shaky breath. "I'm not here to defend anything," he said. "I'm not here to make excuses. You need to know what really happened." I nodded for him to continue. "Brandon manipulated both of us," he said. "Me, Mason, everyone. He calls it empowerment, but it's control. He doesn't want friends. He wants followers." I believed that immediately. Paul unlocked his phone. "You need to see this," he said. He slid it toward me, like it was evidence in a trial. It was a screenshot of him messaging Mason, weeks before the divorce stunt. "Mason, this is too far. Brandon is pushing you into something destructive. This isn't growth. You're losing yourself." Paul tapped to the next screenshot. Brandon's response in the group chat exploded across the screen. "Paul, shut up. You sound brainwashed. Pearl is manipulating Mason, and we're helping him see it. If you can't support the plan, stay out of it." The plan. I felt my chest tighten. Paul swiped again. This time, it was the plan spelled out explicitly by Brandon. Step 1. Detach emotionally. Step 2. Say you need space. Step 3. Move out. Make her feel distance. Step 4. File for divorce. Step 5. If she signs instantly, she never loved you. Step 6. If she refuses, she's worth keeping. My stomach dropped. Brandon didn't just whisper ideas. He orchestrated the entire thing like a twisted science experiment. Paul continued quietly. I tried to stop it, really, but Mason believed Brandon, and Brandon bulldozed both of us. I closed my eyes for a moment. "Thank you for showing me," I said, "but it doesn't change anything." Paul nodded, almost relieved I wasn't blaming him. I figured. I just couldn't keep this to myself anymore. We left separately. Paul looked lighter, like he'd finally dropped a weight he'd been carrying too long. Me? I felt the opposite. Heavy, clear. It wasn't just that Mason listened to Brandon. It was that he chose a test over trust. A stranger's voice over my own. Manipulation over marriage. That night, Mason showed up at my townhouse, pounding on the door, then knocking softer, then sitting on the steps crying. I didn't open it. I documented everything. So did my lawyer. He sent a formal written notice. No unannounced visits. No waiting outside her residence. No appearing near her workplace. No emotional ambushes. Further action will follow if this continues. When it shifted from emotional to legal, Mason backed off. Because consequences, not love, finally interrupted the script. The strangest part of watching your marriage fall apart isn't the pain, it's the clarity. Once the fog lifts, the patterns become obvious. Who was pulling strings? Who was enabling? Who was pretending? And who was silently hoping you wouldn't notice any of it. And just when I thought things couldn't get any more absurd, the triangle finally began to collapse. The meltdown of a man who thought he was a guru. 3 weeks after the legal warning shut down Mason's unannounced visits, my phone buzzed. It was Paul. "You need to see Brandon's new posts. They're something." I wasn't expecting much. Maybe another pseudo-motivational rant about male evolution or relationships as battlegrounds. But no, Brandon had entered what he called his soft king era. There he was on my screen, posting selfies with a tall, bland gym influencer named Trevor. And every caption was a direct contradiction of every principle he'd shoved down Mason's throat. Finally letting myself be vulnerable. I love when he teaches me things. Feeling safe enough to be soft. This was the same man who told Mason emotional intimacy was weakness. The same man who said depending on anyone made you less of a man. The same man who weaponized the word independence like a badge. Now he was posting videos of himself giggling, while Trevor fed him dessert with a tiny spoon. The internet roasted him so thoroughly, the comments should have come with smoke warnings. Paul sent screenshot after screenshot, posts comparing Brandon's new captions to his old "men shouldn't rely on anyone" quotes. Side-by-side collections of contradictory statements. A detailed timeline showing Brandon's hypocrisy unraveling within 14 days. It was surreal and satisfying in the kind of way you don't admit out loud. 2 weeks later, Trevor dumped him. Immediately, Brandon deleted all the photos, unfollowed Trevor, and returned to his old persona, posting quotes about resilience and strength, pretending the relationship never happened. It was almost impressive, the speed at which he rewrote his identity. Paul texted, "Everything makes sense now. He never cared about empowerment. He cared about attention." He was right. And Mason had built his entire test around a man who didn't even believe his own advice. Mason breaks, but too late. While Brandon was reinventing himself for the third time in a month, Mason was unraveling quietly. Even after the written notice, he'd still appear in the periphery of my life. Not directly at my house, not directly at work, but close enough to be seen. Parked near the gym, driving slowly down my street, standing in line at coffee shops he'd never cared about before. Not close enough to violate the terms, but close enough that I knew he still wanted something. Control, closure, or maybe just a chance to reset the narrative. My lawyer documented everything. After the second formal notice, Mason finally stopped appearing. The moment real consequences, not emotional, became involved. The fantasy he'd been living in cracked. Because games only work when everyone plays. I wasn't playing anymore. The divorce begins to move without drama. Once the dust settled, the legal process felt strangely mechanical. Petition, response, asset lists, mediation appointments. The townhouse was split, the way exhausted adults split things when they are too tired to fight. He requested the couch and the dining table he'd taken on move-out day. Fine. I kept the bedroom set, my office desk, my kitchen equipment. His lawyer requested a few odd things. Candles, a plant stand, a decorative mirror I barely remembered buying. I let him have them. The point wasn't the objects, the point was closure. Friends sent awkward messages. You can always tell who heard Brandon's version. They avoided picking sides, but spoke to me like I was recovering from a crime scene. But the ones who truly knew me? They said the quiet part out loud. We always wondered why he gravitated toward Brandon. He stopped sounding like himself. We never saw you as controlling. It didn't make anything easier, but it made the truth clearer. The confrontation in the parking lot. One afternoon, I was leaving a grocery store when I heard it, a voice sharp enough to cut through 2 parking aisles. "Pearl!" I turned slowly. Brandon stormed toward me like he'd been rehearsing this monologue in his bathroom mirror. "You should be ashamed," he snapped. "The way you treated Mason is disgusting. You walked away from a man who was trying to grow." I blinked. "Are you planning to take a breath anytime soon?" He pointed a finger in my face. "Don't interrupt me." "You interrupted my errands," I said calmly. "So we're even." People nearby slowed, pretending to check their bags while eavesdropping. Brandon's chest puffed. "You're cold. You're manipulative. You don't deserve—" "Question," I cut in. "Did your second ex-wife write this speech for you, or your third?" His jaw dropped. "You don't get to talk about my divorces." You're right, I said. I should focus on the one you engineered for someone else. That shut him up. I stepped closer. You built a test around torpedoing my marriage. You convinced Mason that love means emotional warfare. You pretended you had wisdom when you couldn't even keep your own relationship standing long enough to finish a holiday season. Around us, a couple of bystanders actually snickered. Brandon's face twisted like he wasn't sure whether to yell or cry. I'm not fighting you, I said softly. You're not my problem. You never were. I walked past him, loaded my groceries, and drove off. In the rearview mirror, he just stood there, hands on his hips, chest heaving, looking like someone had snatched his script mid-performance. The final day. Weeks passed. The triangle had shattered completely. Paul distanced himself from both of them. Brandon was busy reinventing himself again. Mason had stopped hovering. And then came mediation day. The final signatures. I arrived early. The hallway was quiet, except for the hum of the vent and the turning pages of a receptionist's magazine. When Mason showed up, he looked smaller. Not physically, just deflated, like someone had disconnected the power source he'd been running on. He sat beside me, hands clasped tightly. Finally, he whispered, "Pearl, we really don't have to do this." I turned my head slowly. "We do." He swallowed. "I didn't think it would end like this." "You didn't think," I corrected. "You listened to someone who hated me more than he cared about you." His eyes filled, but he stayed quiet. "Can you ever forgive me?" he asked finally. "I don't hate you," I said, "but I don't trust you, and without trust, there's nothing left." He closed his eyes like the words stung. The mediator opened the door. We went inside, signed, initialed, confirmed, and finalized. It took 20 minutes to end 8 years. When we walked out, Mason lingered near the exit. "Goodbye, Pearl," he said, voice barely audible. "Goodbye, Mason." He left first. The door shut behind him with a soft click. And just like that, the test was over, the triangle was gone, and I was free.